I have heard it said many times that one of the top 1, 2, or 3 greatest fears that many humans have is getting up in front of an audience and speaking. And I have heard it said many times that some people fear speaking in front of an audience more than they fear death or snakes or spiders. Now, I must say that I must be one of those very odd human beings. I've always had the desire to be that person up on a stage in front of an audience having an impact. However, I used to struggle a great deal with nervousness that was so bad that it would make me physically ill. I'm going to talk to you today about my own transformation, about how I overcame nervousness through some very strategic preparation and some mindset shifts. All of that in this episode of the Cliff Ravenscraft Show.
Are you ready to take your message, your business, and your life to the next level?
Want to learn from someone with more than a decade of experience, training tens of thousands of people from all around the world?
Hi, Cliff. This is Pauline from Auckland, New Zealand.
John from Calgary, Alberta.
Amy Porterfield.
Michael Hyatt.
Dan here from Dunedin, New Zealand.
Ray Edwards. Mark Mason. Mike Stelzner.
Pat from Smart Passive Income.
It's Darren from Melbourne, Australia.
Now is the time to live the life of your dreams and do the work you feel most called to do in the world.
Welcome to the Cliff Ravenscraft Show.
Here's your host, Cliff Ravenscraft.
Welcome back, my friend. I am excited to share with you what I think could be a lot of value if you have a desire to communicate with confidence. Recently, I was in one of the sessions of my next level coaching program, and I have an early stage entrepreneur who was asking, "Hey, Cliff, I just recently was reviewing your sales page for the Next Level Mastermind," which, by the way, you can check that out if you wanted to, over at nextlevelmastermind.info, not .com, but nextlevelmastermind.info. He said that up at the top of the page, you had a video presentation. It was obviously it was from your conference, Free the Dream, and it was one of the sessions when you talked about the various different benefits of being in a mastermind group. And he's like, "Cliff, I have never seen, or very rarely have I seen, somebody who gets up on stage and from the very moment, the first few words, has such a level of confidence and clarity. And from the beginning of that episode through, or that speaking engagement, from the beginning of that talk to the end of that talk, it's like you had every single word memorized. It was just flowing from you. Can you tell me, how does one get to that level of speaking?" And so that was one of his questions in my next level coaching program. And I'm like, I love this question. Public speaking is one of my favorite topics. And it's not just for those of you who are interested in getting and speaking up in front of a live audience on a stage at an event. It could be for you how to communicate clearly and with confidence and passion and conviction. The things that you feel are vital to communicate to others. I think that investing your time, effort, and energy in learning how to communicate with confidence and clarity is a worthy investment of time, no matter who you are, whether you ever intend to get on a stage in front of a live audience of people. Now, I am going to tell you that the strategies that I share with you in this episode about how I overcame my own nervousness, they will definitely apply to you in various different settings when you might need to communicate to any group of people. Or if you're a podcaster or a YouTube creator or a social media person creating a 60-second short, all of this could be incredibly beneficial to you. But I do want to speak to those of you who are the subset. that have that dream of getting up on a stage with the lights shining down on you, and when people in the audience are out there and they see the reflection of those spotlights in your pupils reflected from your eyeballs, it is an incredibly profound and intimate experience that I have fallen in love with. Now, my love for public speaking goes all the way back, at least as early as I can remember, to when I was in my first semester of college. I had gone into college with a declaration that I was going to be a history major. My thinking at the time is that I would be a history teacher. I was very much influenced, and I had a lot of respect for a high school teacher who made me fall in love with history, learning from our past. And I thought, I want to have that kind of impact and influence on others. And it was my limited idea of what was possible that made that, to me, seem at the time the best option for me. And I'm not saying that that's not an incredibly powerful option if you happen to be a history teacher. I'm just saying that over time I decided that that's not what I feel most aligned with what I want to create in the world. However, I did go in as a history teacher. Now, what does a history teacher do? A history teacher is in front of a live audience every day that there's a class. That history teacher, at least in my experience and my favorite style of teaching, was a gentleman by the name of Mr. Listerman, and he taught world civilization and just this incredibly profound way of communicating. And he would come in, and hours before our class ever started, he would write all of these notes on all these chalkboards and then whiteboards that actually filled all four walls of the room. It was you were surrounded by notes. And what he would do is he's like, listen, if you want to, go ahead and start transcribing every word that you see on all of these whiteboards and chalkboards. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to lecture you on all of these notes. And so that's exactly what he would do. He would lecture and teach and tell stories about these notes that were on the board. And I'm like, I want to do that. So that's why I was very excited about this idea of being the focus of attention in front of a classroom of students. So this is my earliest days in college. Now, I also declared myself a minor in college, and that was theater. You see, I had the amazing opportunity to go to many different plays, Broadway plays. I saw Les Mis and Phantom of the Opera and all of the most amazing different Broadway plays and some offbeat plays. And I would go to some of the plays that were held at Northern Kentucky University, and I'm like, I want to be a theater minor. I want to be on stage. I want that spotlight to be on me. I want to entertain people. I want to get up there and have that level of emotional impact and influence on an audience of people who are hanging on my every word. Yeah, I know. I'm crazy, right? There are very few of us in this world, I think, that are like this, but I was born with whatever that gene is. Now, I did sign up for what was required, a public speaking course. And I'm like, this is going to be a breeze. However, up until this point, I had never had any experience of actually having the spotlight on me, having an entire group of people who are sitting there ready to hear me communicate what I have prepared to share with them. And to say that I was nervous during the preparation of my very first and, of course, every subsequent speech for that public speaking class is an understatement. I over-prepared. I went above and beyond. I spent countless hours combing every possible piece of information and insight that could be packed into a talk, and I felt every single thing that I had studied and researched was essential, and I needed to communicate it all. There's nothing can be left out. If I left anything that I've learned in my research out of this talk, then I'm doing a disservice to my audience. By the way, little foreshadowing of what may come later. I've learned that I actually did a terrible disservice by not chucking out practically everything that I had learned in my research, other than a very few easy, memorable points that actually led toward my objective, my single focus of what I thought was most essential for transformation in the lives of those who were listening. So that, again, foreshadowing, whether that comes out in this episode or maybe some other episode in a series of episodes on public speaking. And yes, I am already, my wheels are turning about this possibility of being a series of podcast episodes here on the Cliff Ravenscraft Show, which I just told my wife, Stephanie, I said, listen, if I get to 5 episodes in a series on this topic, whether they're sequential or spread apart, but if I hit 5 episodes, then I'll take those 5 episodes of the Cliff Ravenscraft Show and turn it into a podcast called Cliff's Notes on Public Speaking. So who knows, maybe you're listening to this at some point in my future and you have never heard of Cliff Ravenscraft. You've never heard of the Cliff Ravenscraft Show and what was formerly known as Podcast Answer Man. And you simply were forwarded a link to an episode called Cliff's Notes on Public Speaking. And here you are listening to me now. Well, it all started with the Cliff Ravenscraft Show, which all started with the Podcast Answer Man, which all started with a bunch of other stuff, which you've probably already heard about in the introductory episode to Cliff's Notes on Public Speaking. Can you see how I'm already like, of course this is going to happen, or maybe it's not. We are going to play it by ear. Now, what I was getting at, though, is that I had a lot of anxiety. And I felt like the most important thing in the world for me was to not leave anything out. The more I put in, the more I will impress others. The more people will think great things about me. They will give me pats on the back. I later in life learned about the 5 love languages. And if you've not heard of that, just do a search in Amazon for the book called The 5 Love Languages. And I had discovered a long time ago that my love language was words of affirmation. So I was hoping people would say some incredibly nice things about me and the way that I delivered my talk. And all of that pressure was building up anxiety in me. In fact, I was so filled with anxiety, the only thing I could do to keep my anxiety down was to work even harder and harder and harder and research more and more and more about what should be included in this talk that I'm going to give for my very first speech for public speaking class in college, in my first semester of college. And the more and more that I researched, the more and more I felt had to be in there. And I had gotten to the place where leading up to, let's just say, the day and a half or 2 days before my first public speaking experience in front of that classroom, I was having a hard time sleeping. I was getting up several times throughout the night, and the night before the talk, I found myself with pits in my stomach, and I just couldn't sleep at all the night before. And I can't recall all of the physical ailment that I experienced then, but I'm going to share with you that this was a recurring pattern for me for a while. But I will tell you that I do know that I did not sleep the night before I gave that first talk. I got up in front of that audience, and I can feel the quivering in my voice box. I can feel the shaking in my body. I was visibly and audibly shaken when I spoke my first few words, all the way up to about 2 or 3 minutes into that talk. I was paralyzed in some way in fear, and I was visibly shaken in front of that audience. But after about 2 to 3 minutes, and certainly by 5 minutes, I had overcome all of that, And I began to really get connected with the fact that I've got something important to communicate. And as soon as I lost the focus on what are people thinking about me and how am I actually going to deliver this important thing that I've researched, I just spewed out all of this stuff with great passion, with great vigor, and it was incredibly powerful. In fact, I felt like in front of that audience, up there with everyone's attention on me, listening to the words that I'm speaking, I felt home. I felt like I was at home. I felt like this is where I'm supposed to be. And by the end of that first speech, I was like, wow, I can't wait to do that again. Well, I had multiple opportunities to do that in front of that audience, the same classroom, for the entire semester. And you know what? Everything I just told you was rinse and repeat, rinse and repeat. So as soon as I finished my talk, I immediately wow, that is such a rush. I can't wait to do this again, until it came time to prepare. About 2 weeks or a week and a half before the next speech, I went through the exact same process. Nothing had changed. It was nervousness, anxiety, over preparation, freaking out, physically ill, can't sleep, and then nervousness, visibly shaken, the whole thing. Same thing happened to me, by the way, when the next semester I signed up for some improv class for acting and another acting class that we had to actually do a couple scenes from plays that were rehearsed. And the one thing about the improv class is it's just made up. So there is no preparation. You can't prepare for it. You just go in and play off everything. And there was a little bit of nervousness about that. But once I got up there, I'm like, okay, no big deal. And I thought for sure, if I'm memorizing a scene from a play and I'm acting off of another actor, I'm certainly not going to have the same kind of problems that I had when I was up on in front of a stage in the classroom delivering a speech that I delivered. If this thing bombs, I didn't write this scene, and I'm acting a part and all this other stuff. I'm thinking, but no. I had the same issue. I over-prepared, I over-rehearsed, I over-memorized, so much so that if I missed a syllable of a word, it totally freaked me out in the moment, but I continued somehow to go on, but consciously, my mind was 3 statements back when I missed a syllable. And I'm like, stop it, Cliff, you're in this other moment over here. All right, so, but again, visibly nervous, in that acting class, rehearsing somebody else's words that I've memorized, visibly, audibly nervous. You can hear the shaking in my voice until about 2 or 3 minutes in. And then as soon as the scene is really picking up steam and the momentum is going, I'm fully embodied, fully aligned inside of this scene. This is me, and I feel at home again. And by the end of that scene, I'm like, oh, what a rush. All right? Now, after my college experiences, I got married in 1996. And shortly after getting married, I felt that maybe my life might be devoted to becoming a pastor, a full-time ministry career. And in some ways, I still feel like what I do today is very much in alignment with what I felt called to do back then. But when I tried to explain to people about how I felt a strong desire to be of service to others, that somehow my life is meant to be devoted to educating others, to helping people break free from anything that's holding them back from living the life for which they feel called to create. I want to be a source of education, encouragement, inspiration, and motivation, that I really truly feel like this is what God's put me on this earth to do. And at some level, in some way, doing that through communicating to audiences of people. And when I told the folks at the church that I was going to at the time, they said, Cliff, we obviously see that. And yeah, it's very clear that God's calling you to be a pastor. And I was very impressionable at the time, and I kind of liked the idea of having a career that allowed me to get up every single week in front of an audience of people. It spoke to something that I felt very drawn to. Now, I had very limited training from that point, before up to that point. I had one public speaking class. I had a handful of experiences with classes related to theater, doing some performing in front of small classrooms. But now I'm here with an opportunity to do what I think is maybe among one of the most intense forms of public speaking. And what I'm talking about is getting up in front of an audience of people called a congregation in a church where every word that you're speaking is being scrutinized for alignment with what the current belief system is for that body of people. And I don't know if you have ever grown up in Christianity in any form or others, that have you ever heard about how much disagreement there are about certain things, and there's a wide variety of different interpretations for everything. And to get up in front of that audience of people and say, okay, Cliff's up here, he's studying for his ministry license, and we're going to give him the opportunity to speak this Sunday morning while our pastor's out of town, and he's going to be speaking on the life of Joseph. And I remember that was the very first talk that I ever, or sermon that I ever preached, was the life of Joseph. And yes, I do mean that I actually preached on the entire life of Joseph in one sermon. It was a lengthy sermon, and it was well researched, and it was very similar to what I talked about before. It's like, oh my gosh, I am so nervous about this opportunity. I am over preparing. Basically, it's one of those scenarios where I went through Genesis and read all the parts, and I'm like, I'm going to highlight just the parts that I think are important and essential for me to include in this sermon. And by the end of it, it's like, I've pretty much highlighted everything that has ever been written about the life of Joseph in the book of Genesis. Oh my gosh. And I did it because I was nervous. It's like, I can't leave anything out. Everything's got to be in there. There's nothing that's in here that's not important. Again, I was doing a massive disservice for that audience. Don't get me wrong. There's nothing wrong with the idea that every single person by the end of the talk said, wow, you know what really stood out to me and what really spoke to me was this. And somebody else had something different, and somebody else had something different. But I remember there were about 85 people for my very first sermon. And if I had to guess, there were probably about 60 to 70 different things that people walked away with as far as what they thought my message was intended to communicate. I've since learned that can be one way to approach things. However, knowing what I know now, it would absolutely be possible for me to get up there on Sunday morning in front of that 85 people in the congregation, and by the end of that congregation, it's not to say that all 85 would be able to tell you exactly what I hoped to communicate, but my guess is that about 70 to 80 of the people in the audience would be able to tell you exactly what I wanted to share as a transformational message. You know, what did Cliff talk about in the sermon today? If somebody was to ask them that afternoon, 70 to 80 people today would be able to say, well, Cliff gave a talk where he gave 3 different illustrations from the life of Joseph that demonstrate how we can succeed in our work life. And it's like, wow, what were the 3 instances? And he talked about this, he talked about this, and he talked about this. And here are the 3 main ingredients that make up a successful work experience. And they could actually communicate that hours later or even days later because they remember those 3 illustrations, those 3 main ingredients. And not that, I mean, some people are going to be in their own head and something's going to hit them in a certain way that's unique to them. And I'm like, wow, I don't know how they got that, but I'm thrilled that they heard that. It sounds like that was an important insight for them to receive. And I'm glad that it came out of my talk. But I do know that most people picked up what I had laid down. That's what I have the ability to do today. But when I did my first sermon on the life of Joseph, it was like, I was all over the place. I mean, literally all over the place. Don't get me wrong. I will say this, that overall, what I lacked in skill in public speaking, I made up for with passion. I have a powerful way of communicating that captures people's attention, and I do know how to hold an audience and know that I'm actually making connection by actually, reading the body language of what's going out there and making eye contact. I had known enough about that from my public speaking classes and also from my theater presentation training. But I tell you what, I still really struggled. So much so that first sermon for the life of Joseph, I think I studied and researched a month for that talk. I wrote down a transcript of every word I would speak, and then I recorded it onto micro cassette tapes, because this is before we had all the technology that we have today. I would then go for long walks, 2-hour walks, mind you. I would go for long walks and listen to that over and over and over again where I read it, so that I could actually try to say what I'm ready to say next in the memorized transcript of my talk. Now, I would be incredibly nervous leading up to, let's just say, the 3 or 4 days before the event. And what I will share with you is that I waking up several times in the middle of the night, a couple of nights before that first sermon, and then the night before the sermon, absolutely no sleep whatsoever. And what happened was, when it came time for us to go to the church and I'm getting ready to deliver that first talk, I'm in the parking lot. We had just parked, and I got out and I had what would be called a Charlie horse in my leg. And it's like, is it called a Charlie horse, or was it shin splits, or did I have both? I can't remember, but my leg had seized up. It was incredibly painful. Now, thankfully, it had unseized before it was time for me to go in and sit down and then be called up to deliver my sermon, my talk in front of this audience. But wow, my body was so nervous that it was seizing up on me. And then, of course, you can probably imagine by now, I've been introduced to the congregation, why I'm up there, why our pastor's out of town, and what I'm about ready to speak on. And I got up there, and yes, my voice was trembling. I was white-knuckling the platform in front of me. They call it the pulpit. I was white-knuckling it, trying to hold myself still, and yet you could still see that I was shaking and audibly nervous for the first 2 to 3 minutes. And then after the first 2 to 3 minutes, I was back home. I was in the zone. I felt like I belong here. And immediately I became almost a different version of me, a completely different person. And I'm like, wow. And I'm going through all of this, and I found that, wow, I had all of this memorized, but now all of a sudden I'm going off script. And things are coming out, and stories are coming up that I didn't intend. This wasn't in my preparation. In fact, at one point I said, "Well, you know what? This isn't in my outline here, but I feel led to share with you this story." And of course it did actually fit. And it's like, this is starting to flow, and I'm like, maybe I don't have to transcribe everything. I don't have to script out everything for me to memorize. Maybe I could just get up here and flow with an outline and some preparation, but wow. And then at the rush. And then after I finished with that last closing line, I'm like, wow, that was amazing. I can't wait to do this again. That would be a recurring experience every single time I preached from 1996 all the way through 2011. Those are the years that I was involved in what would be called official ministry that would be recognized by most people, me preaching in churches. Now, many of you know that I started podcasting as a hobby in December 2005. By 2006, end of 2006, I'm starting to dream of maybe doing something with content creation as a career and having an impact and influence in people's lives through speaking my voice behind this microphone, being a source of entertainment, education, encouragement, and inspiration. And also, I had developed a large number of people who were interested in paying me to teach them what I know about podcasting, all the technical ins and outs. And one of the things that was a big deal back in the day were these conferences called pod camps. Now, a pod camp was a free user-generated conference. So basically, it's a bunch of volunteers that get together and say, hey, let's host an event all devoted to the topic of podcasting. We'll reserve a venue, and we will set up a certain number of stages for people to have the opportunity to come and share their knowledge, experience, and expertise in the area of podcasting. And as far as who gets to speak, rather than a typical conference where the organizers, audition and invite specific speakers who are recognized leaders, it was basically first come, first serve. Hey, here, go to this website, fill out this application, and the first 13 people who sign up, you are our 13 speakers. Well, of course, me being the person I am, what did I do? I signed up for every podcamp I could possibly sign up for, and I tried to make sure I always had the opportunity to speak. And I did. And my experience in speaking in front of those audiences was somewhat the same. I definitely had lots of information and insight to share. I almost always had extreme difficulty in only including what was essential. I tried to throw everything out there, and most of my talks included way more information and insight than an average human being can consume. I tried to fit in thousands and thousands and thousands of hours of experience and insights into the world of podcasting into a single 45-minute talk. But I tried. And you know what? What I miss in skill communicating professionally in front of an audience, I made up for passion. And I made up with great, valuable insight and information that was being delivered. So in spite of the lack of skill in public communication, I made up for it with passion and insight and valuable delivery of items. Again, ask people what they got out of my podcasts, and there would probably be just as many different ideas about what Cliff meant to communicate as there were people in the audience. Everybody had to come up with their own reason or own thought about what Cliff was trying to communicate from that stage. Instead, people would just say, well, this is what I got out of what Cliff said. And because there were so many different things, there were so many different things that you could actually say was the thing that you thought it was all about. So that was my early PodCamp experience. I did so many of those. I was eventually invited to speak at Blog World. I had decided to host a community cruise with our podcast listeners from around the world, from all the podcasts that my wife Stephanie and I were creating at the time. It was a Disney cruise, and Paul Colligan was talking to the CEO and co-founder of Blog World at the time, Rick Calvert, and he said to Rick, he says, hey, did you hear what Cliff Ravenscraft's doing? And I love this story. He's like, who's Cliff Ravenscraft? He goes, you don't know Cliff Ravenscraft, the Podcast Answer Man? Oh, I've heard of Podcast Answer Man. Okay, so tell me, what's Cliff Ravenscraft doing? He's hosting a cruise for people all over the world who are going on a Disney cruise with him. He goes, no way. He's like, so you don't know, what do you know about Cliff Ravenscraft? And so they get to talking. And the next thing I know, of course I hear about this much later, but this is what happened before. I get an email, says, hey, Cliff Ravenscraft, my name is Rick Calvert. I'm the CEO, co-founder. I was talking with Paul Colligan. He told me about some things you've got going on in the world. I'd love to jump on a phone call and talk to you if you have a few moments. And so I said, sure. We scheduled this time. And he says, Cliff, I would love to invite you to come to speak at Blog World New York and tell your story. And I'm like, you know what? I have been wanting to come to Blog World for the last several years. And by the way, back then, my mindset was that I couldn't afford it. Today, my mindset is I could not afford it. I mean, it's like if I would have known then what I know now, I would have invested and gone to Blog World every year that there was an opportunity to go because of so many other things, which is not a part of this episode. So we'll just keep going. I got invited to go to Blog World. And once again, now this is a bigger deal. This is not anybody and everyone can sign up. This is a conference that people are paying money to attend. And by golly, if they're going to take some of their time, effort, and energy at an event to attend your talk instead of one of the other 14 talks they could have chosen, by golly, you better deliver. There's a higher standard here compared to the podcamps. And again, while I have some experience doing public speaking in front of an audience on a stage, it's still not been amazing. It's been good enough. All right, so that's what I'm trying to get at. But again, what I had at Blog World in 2011, anyway, whenever I got invited to speak at Blog World NYC, I got up there and my talk had a standing room only audience. Now, granted, they gave me a medium-sized room, so I did not have a large room. I didn't have one of the small ones, but I didn't have a large one. It was a medium-sized room. If I had to guess, there were probably 250 people or 250 chairs sitting in front of the stage that I was speaking on. However, much to the chagrin of the fire department and fire marshal, who was there, by the way, there were people lined up all the way from the front side wall all the way along the back wall, and on both sides. So both sides of the walls of the stage, people were standing up. There were people sitting down in the aisles on the sides. There were a layer of 3 to 4 people deep on the back wall, and the door to my room was open. And there were 35 or 40 people huddled around the open door. Now, what I did not know was that most of those people had come to Blog World because I had been talking about it nonstop, and that I was going to give this talk, and so many people came there to Blog World because of my talk. Rick Calvert, CEO and co-founder of Blog World, was there in the audience. And at that event, at the speaker event that night, they had a speaker dinner or a speaker cocktail party or whatever. He came up to me and says, Cliff, that was amazing. And by the way, same whole scenario, freaking out for weeks in advance. I've got to share every single detail of my life of how I transitioned from employee to full-time self-employed. And I got to tell you, I spewed out practically everything, and I tried to go through it as quickly as I could, just sharing with you with great passion and zeal and a lot of interesting and insightful and inspirational stuff. I spewed everything I could think to fit into it, all over that audience. Now, did people love it? Yes. Did Rick Calvert love it? Yes. Was I an incredibly skilled speaker where I actually had an intention ahead of time what I hope people would walk out of that room and go and do? No. No clue. I just wanted them to be inspired. I just wanted them to take something from my story and go out and apply it, whatever it is. And there's maybe one could argue maybe there's nothing wrong with that. Although I've had exposure to an opportunity to see that maybe there's a better way to communicate. Anyway, I was invited that night at that speaker dinner to go and speak at Blog World LA, did the same thing there. Eventually, I became the director of podcasting for Blog World, and it eventually became New Media Expo. And I had so many great experiences that came just because of these speaking opportunities. Every time I got in front of an audience incredibly powerful things started to happen and open up for me as an entrepreneur, as a content creator. I will tell you, there is very little that can propel you immediately forward in credibility in the eyes of an audience of people who are your target audience. Very few things other than actually getting on a stage and delivering confidently and clearly a message that impacts them. You will have lifelong followers. And that is exactly what these things opened up for me, not to mention just business opportunities left and right. So that was my blog world experience. And then at the end of 2011, I'm like, you know what? I really like this public speaking thing. And one of the things that I notice at Blog World is they have these things called keynotes. And of course, I've noticed it at other conferences as well. But anyway, I noticed that they had the opening keynote and they had the closing keynote. And they also had, it was a 4 or 5 day conference. And so every morning they had a morning keynote and a closing keynote for each of the days of the conference. However, in 2011, at the end of the year, I had set up a desire to have 12 goals for 2012. And 2 of the goals for 2012 was, number 1, I want to actually be a paid speaker. And I'm not talking about, Cliff, we're going to cover your air travel, or we're going to cover the airfare, we're going to pay for your hotel, and we're going to pay for your meals while you're here. That's great. I love that. And I had several different opportunities where that was the case. But at the end of 2011, I said in 2012, I want to break through a barrier when it comes to public speaking. I want to become, number 1, a paid public speaker. And number 2, I want to become a keynote speaker. And let me explain to you what I mean by keynote speaker. I'm not talking about where it's multiple day conferences and on day 2 or 3 of the event, I'm the morning keynote or the closing day keynote. No, when I say keynote speaker, I want to be the guy who stands up on the stage and I am the very first talk of the entire event. And my talk is designed to get you excited and build momentum for what this entire event is about ready to offer you. Or I'd like to be the closing keynote where you take everything you've experienced at this entire event, and I want to be the guy who wraps it all up in one package and sends you home with this message, inspired and motivated. Opening keynote or closing keynote, that's what I mean by keynote speaker. And so in 2012, 2 of my 12 goals, I want to be a paid speaker and I want to be a keynote speaker. And guess what? Both of those goals became a reality for me in 2012. I had my very first paid opening keynote speaking opportunity in September of 2012. And it was in Arlington, Texas. I did the opening keynote address for the Catholic New Media Conference. It was my very first ever opening keynote address to a multi-day conference. It was my very first paid speaking conference. Yes, they paid for my hotel. Yes, they paid for my meals. Yes, they paid for my air travel. But they also paid me a speaking fee to speak at that event. The interesting thing, by the way, I did the opening keynote address for the Catholic New Media Conference in 2012, and I'm not Catholic. That just blows my mind. Anyway, if you want the actual recording of my voice during that first public speaking event where I'm the opening keynote, it's my first paid event, my entire keynote is in audio form, and you can listen to it in episode number 275 of the Cliff Ravenscraft Show podcast, which, by the way, is what I'm recording this for, but you might be listening to this in maybe Podcast Answer Man, the all-new version. You might be listening to this in a podcast called Cliff's Notes on profitable coaching, or you may be listening to this in Cliff's Notes on public speaking. But the main show that I'm creating, this first episode on public speaking in this series that I'm going to create probably is for the Cliff Ravenscraft Show. And this podcast, for the first almost 500 or so episodes, this podcast used to be called Podcast Answer Man. But it's episode number 275 in the archives of what is now known as the Cliff Ravenscraft Show. And I encourage you, if you want to hear what I'm talking about, go and listen to it, because guess what you will hear? You will hear Cliff's voice audibly shaking. Audibly. You will hear the trembling in my voice during the first few minutes of me speaking on that stage. And if you listen through, eventually you'll hear the gears kick into place, and immediately I shift, and all of a sudden I own the stage. And what I mean by that is I feel at home on the stage. All of a sudden I'm like, this is what I'm meant to do in the world. I'm supposed to be up here. I'm supposed to be doing this thing. And so it's fun that is actually recorded. And so if you want to, I'll put links in the show notes. Just look for episode number 275 of the Cliff Ravenscraft Show with a link to my first paid keynote address. All right. So right after I did that and I shared that experience in that podcast episode, my great friend and mentor and also client at the time, Michael Hyatt, invited me to be a paid speaker in his very first ever platform conference. Now, Michael Hyatt had just published a book that became a New York Times bestselling book called Platform: How to Get Noticed in a Noisy World. And it was all about people who were early stage entrepreneurs and how to build a platform so that you can have an audience and you can do the kind of stuff that we do through online business today. Anyway, Michael Hyatt said, Cliff, I heard about your experience in Dallas. I love your story. I would love for you to come and speak to my audience about the opportunity that exists for them in the world of podcasting. And I'd like for you to do a talk that will encourage and inspire people to launch a podcast, if that's the route that appeals to them. And I said, I'd be delighted to. And so he sent me a contract. I got a speaker fee plus all the travel and meal expenses and all that other stuff. And I'm like, this is amazing. And I will tell you, I was incredibly nervous. I did this whole same thing. I had experienced some new physical ailments that are less than desirable to talk about. But let me just say that I had some very upset stomach, and I spent most of my time in the bathroom the night before my talk. I won't go any further than that, just to say that, let's just say I felt physically in distress. I was so ill, so nervous for that particular one. Now, was I nervous before my Catholic New Media one? Yes, but this was a whole new level. All right, this was a whole different level. All of a sudden, this is my target audience for my business. Every single person in attendance could potentially become a paid client. This is one of my most influential mentors in my life, somebody who is a mentor, somebody who is a friend, and this is his first conference, and am I going to let him down? And my nervousness, my anxiety was off the charts. I did something incredibly embarrassing now looking back, but it just was where I was at the time. And I knew that I was going to be nervous. And so I figured rather than try to just play it off, I did something that would intentionally make me nervous. And so I told the audience that, hey, just want to let you know, my history with public speaking is that I'm usually nervous for the first 2 to 3 minutes of getting on a stage, and then everything kicks in for me. So if you'll bear with me, I'm going to do something to embarrass myself intentionally. And I'd like you to sing with me as we sing this one verse from The Sound of Silence. It was ridiculous. It was stupid. But you know what? Everybody understood. It immediately got all the nervousness out of my body, and I delivered an incredibly powerful story about my journey in podcasting. Standing ovation. And if you were to ask anyone in that audience, what is it that Cliff wanted you to do as a result of that talk? And you would have gotten, let's just say there were, I think, maybe 120 people at that very first event. And if you probably would have got at least 100 different answers. And I only know that now looking back because here's what happened. Ken Davis was Michael Hyatt's business partner for that event, for that conference. He says, Cliff, this is incredibly powerful. The story you have, your presence on stage, the way that your audience connects with you, the authenticity and transparency that you bring to your talk. What an incredible experience. And there's only one thing. I think you could definitely turn this into something huge. You have a ton of potential if you were to learn just a handful of skills and strategies. And Michael and I are partnering also on another conference that I've been doing for many years, for several decades, teaching people how to speak professionally. And it's called the SCORE Conference, SCORRE. And he says, if you'd like, we don't typically believe in giving things away for free, but we trust that if we were to offer this to you at no charge, that you would be the type of person who would fully engage and you would take and create something from this experience. And so we'd like to invite you to come to the SCORE conference and be trained professionally how to speak. And if you accept this invitation, we'd like you to come back and speak again in November in Dallas, Texas. And I'm like, wow, okay. But that, by the way, that first event was February 2013 in Nashville, Tennessee. And that's where this invitation came from. So that summer, I went out to Colorado and I went to my very first SCORE conference, and it changed my life. And that is not an understatement. It literally changed my life. So much so that when I went to speak at Platform Conference just several months later in November of 2013, I think it was, 2012, 2013, this is all a little blurry in my mind, but it was just several months after the Nashville experience. I was at the second Platform Conference, and if you were to ask anyone in that audience, what was Cliff's message trying to convey? And every single person, not one person there, would have been able to say anything other than he wanted to share that there are 7 reasons why it's absolutely obvious that the best platform for creating, to getting noticed in a noisy world is by launching a podcast. He gave us 7 reasons why this is the best opportunity. And by the way, I asked everybody in the audience at the beginning, who here has a podcast? And there were a handful of people who raised their hands. Who here currently has plans to launch a podcast? And just a few more hands raised. By the end of my talk, this is how I closed it. I said, who here again has a podcast? Stand up right now if you have a podcast. And the same number of people who raised their hand at the beginning stood up. And then I said, who here that does not have a podcast has a plan to launch a podcast within the next 90 days? And I am not kidding you. Every single person in the audience who was not already standing, meaning those who already had a podcast, every one of them stood up. And to say that I earned a lot of extra income after that talk is a massive understatement. Here's the difference, though. When I got up in front of that audience in February in Nashville, Tennessee, the first Platform Conference, I had physical ailment, body seizing, major distress in my digestive system. I mean, the nervousness was palpable. When I had completed the SCORE speaker training, I got up and prepared for my talk, completely changed my outline. Only took me about 20 minutes to completely redo my outline. It probably took me another 30 minutes to reorganize all of my slides. That was all the preparation that it took. I practiced it a handful of times through some online web streams, and I had slept like super peaceful the night before that November experience, the second platform conference. When I got up on stage, there was no shaking in my voice. There was no nervousness. It had completely disappeared. And you might be asking, how did I do that? Well, I will share with you there are 4 strategies that I implemented that I learned at the SCORE conference. Strategy number 1, I learned how to develop a reproducible outline strategy for a talk. So at the SCORE conference, they give you a single session that is designed to teach you exactly how to outline a talk. Now, it is a very restrictive format. It is very much structured. And at first, I resisted the idea of limiting myself to such a rigid outline until I saw the results, until I saw how much nervousness was eliminated and how much over preparation was avoided, until I learned how much clearer and focused my talk was, until I learned that, wow, every single time I get on a stage with an outline that's prepared in this way, that I know exactly who my target audience is. I know exactly what I want to either enable them to do or persuade them to do. And I know exactly 3 to 5 and maybe even 7 different techniques, strategies, reasons, whatever the keyword that I choose. I know that I can deliver this, and because there are so few strategies, techniques, or whatever, I can memorize them all. Even if I had no slides, if my slides completely went out in the middle of my talk, I wouldn't need them. I wouldn't need any slides. I could actually prepare an outline for a talk in 15 minutes before giving a talk on nearly any topic using this reproducible outline. That's the first strategy. And while I resisted the idea at first, the SCORE conference gives you the opportunity to come in and deliver a 5-minute talk. And by the way, I love that they said if you can't deliver a talk in 5 minutes, nobody should ever give you 45 minutes to an hour to talk. So you come in the first night and you give a 5-minute talk that you've prepared on your own. But then you are required to learn this outline and deliver a talk based upon this reproducible outline that is very structured, very limited, but it's designed to keep you focused. And you give 3 different 5-minute talks during the remaining 3 nights of the event, and your quality of communication infinitely increases exponentially between each one of those talks. And by the time I'm left, I'm like, yes, I will use this reproducible outline each time. So that's strategy number 1. Now, will I come back and tell you in the future episodes? Will I tell you what that reproducible outline is? Yes, I will. Do you have to wait until then? No. You can go ahead and get the book Secrets of Dynamic Communication by Ken Davis. Prepare with focus, deliver with clarity, and speak with power. And by the way, the foreword was written by Michael Hyatt. Anyway, again, the book is called Secrets of Dynamic Communication by Ken Davis, my personal mentor in so many things in life, but also my public speaking. Anyway, I will put a link to that in the show notes. But strategy number 1, one of the things that really helped me overcome my nervousness is not over preparing, not over freaking out about what to include, but instead using a reproducible outline that keeps you focused on knowing exactly what it is that you're there to do. Strategy number 2, I had to develop an audience-centered mindset. You see, before going to the SCORE conference, the reason why I was so freaked out, so worried, why my body was like seizing up on me and my digestive system was in so much distress was because I was afraid about what my future survival would be. You see, I was afraid that What if I get up there and people don't like me? What if I get up there and I make a mistake? What if I get up there and people decide that what I had to share wasn't valuable? What if people get up there and say mean and nasty things about me? What if nobody here hires me? What if not only nobody here hires me, but when people ask, have you ever heard about Cliff Ravenscraft? I'm thinking about hiring him. Oh, don't do that. Gosh, I saw him speak and he was a total dud. These were the thoughts that were going through. What if what if people see how I look physically and I've not been taking care of myself and I'm overweight? I had so many hang-ups about what my fear was about how I would be perceived. I was the center of my attention in all of those things, going all the way back to that class on public speaking during my first semester of college, my doing the improv and doing the rehearsed scenes in the acting class from a play. When it came to my sermons, I know that I could argue that I was deciding that I really wanted this to be on an incredible, powerful message related to your faith and all this other stuff, and this is about you. But quite frankly, my nervousness made it clear that I was mostly concerned about me and how I would be perceived, how this would impact my future as a pastor. How would I be invited to have another opportunity? Or would I be banned forever from ever having an opportunity to speak to a congregation again? And then at PodCamps, would people think I'm a fraud? You know, it's like, gosh, everybody knows that stuff. I can't believe that they wasted an entire session and gave it to him with this basic stuff. I was so worried about me. And what happened was that I realized that if I would just stop focusing on me and understand that Michael Hyatt didn't invite me and didn't pay me to speak at the platform conference to make a name for myself. No, he had an audience of people who had read his book, How to Build a Platform and Get Noticed in a Noisy World. And they needed to be introduced that one of the platforms that you could build your platform, or one of the places where you could build your platform on, is through a podcast. And he knew that I had the experience and expertise and the skill and the technology knowledge that I could deliver. He didn't care what I looked like physically. He wasn't so concerned about me throwing every single thing I know. He simply wanted to take and said, Cliff, if you could just take these people who know nothing about the opportunity that exists in podcast, and if you could just explain to them about that opportunity and convince them if they think it's the right thing based upon the opportunity and as you present it, if you could just inspire them to go and take action and launch a podcast. That's what he was paying me for. Not to make a good impression. And I learned, it's like, this is not about me at all. And so shifting my mindset to what am I delivering to this audience in spite of any of my imperfections and all of my imperfections, quite frankly, in spite of the fact that I might miss a syllable of a word 3 sentences back, in spite of the fact that I meant to tell this one little anecdote, but I forgot it. It's okay. They'll never know that I meant to include it. The question is do I know exactly what I'm intending to deliver to this audience? And have I just remembered the 3 ingredients or the 5 strategies or, the 7 benefits that come from podcasting that you can't get from any other platform opportunity? Can I deliver that with confidence and clarity and get them to take action? It doesn't even matter if my zipper is down the entire time. That shifted everything for me, and it got rid of the nervousness. It got rid of the illness, the inability to sleep the night before, the audible shake and visible shaking for the first few minutes. It eliminated it. By the way, I do want to say this. Anytime I get in front of an audience, a live crowd, I still have the butterflies. I want you to know that. I still have the butterflies. There's something about the importance and the opportunity that exists, the energy of that still brings a little bit of what I call the butterflies, but I am not physically ill. I am not losing sleep. And quite frankly, I learned a few mantras and affirmations, and sitting down and taking a mindful moment before getting on that stage and reminding myself that this is about them, that everybody's there for a reason, and that everybody that's in the audience is meant to be there today specifically for what I'm about ready to deliver, that I have prepared with confidence and clarity about exactly what I hope that they will take away and go and do. And I know my content. I am well versed in it, and I have been recognized as a leader in this area to deliver this message, and I will do so with confidence. I will do so with clarity, and regardless of any of my mistakes, everyone will pick up what it is that I'm meant to lay down in this message. That is strategy number 2. I developed an audience-centered mindset, and I kept reminding myself, it's not about me. It's not about me. It is not about me. Strategy number 3, I learned to master my bookends. One of my favorite little techniques, and this wasn't a part of the overall curriculum, but one of the coaches, I went to the SCORE conference, which is a 4-day conference on public speaking. And it's intense. It's from morning to night. Don't go planning to do any work from your business while you're there. But it's 4 full intensive days, going from early in the morning until late in the evening. And one of the coaches that I had the first time I attended this event said something to the effect of, you have only one opportunity to make the first impression during your talk. And if I could just instill in you one technique that will really help you, is memorize what your first words out of your mouth will be and what the last statements out of your mouth will be. Choose those. Don't feel like you have to memorize your entire talk. Don't feel like you have to script it out and memorize it. Some people choose to do those things and all the other stuff, but if you could just choose what your opening line is. And I took that and ran with it. So while I go to conferences where lots of other people speak, and many times the average speaker gets up there and it's like, oh, wow, thank you so much. It's such an honor to be here. Thank you so much today. Blah, blah, blah. And it's like the same thing over and over again. It's like, oh, okay, yep, got that. So one of the talks that I did for my 5-minute speech at that first thing after I heard this, I did a talk on what was you have to become an expert at saying no. The 4 reasons why you should become an expert at saying no to others. And it was my time. They did the introduction. Everybody is instructed to applaud, and they're welcoming you to the stage. And I got up there and I stood in stone silence for 5 seconds as I looked at every single person eye to eye. And then I said these words: Jesus was an expert at telling people no. And then I went to tell a story. And I told the story of how Jesus was at the temple with some of his disciples, and they went back to the house that evening, and everybody brought their sick and ill people, and Jesus healed everyone. And it says in the scriptures, early in the morning before it was light, Jesus left the house and went to a solitary place to pray. And the next thing it says is that, and then when it was daylight, the disciples were wondering where Jesus went, and they went out looking for him. And the next line says this: they found Jesus and says, "Where have you been? Everyone is looking for you," they exclaimed. Now, again, exclaimed says a lot, right? So you would imagine Jesus being who we think Jesus is, what would Jesus do? Well, of course, Jesus like, oh my gosh, yes, I hear you. Chances are that, the people left after being healed, word got round, and people went and got their brothers and sisters from the neighboring towns and villages and brought them all to the house, and they're all looking for me. Yeah, let me grab my stuff and let's go. Let's go do that. But is that what Jesus said? No. Jesus didn't do that. He says, listen, I've spent some time here and I now know what to go to next. You guys go back and get the stuff. I will meet you in the next village because that's what I'm meant to do next. So in essence, what did Jesus do? He said no. He said no to all of those people. And so anyway, that was a different way of starting a talk. But my first lines wasn't, oh, it's so great to be here. Thank you so much for having me. Today I'm going to talk about such and such. And I'm going to, no. It's like Jesus was an expert at telling people no. Anyway, it was so powerful. And that's what I call the strategy. Strategy number 3. We're going to call this mastering your bookends. What is that first line that will open up your talk? And then what is that powerful last statement that you want to leave people hanging on as you walk off the stage? And knowing exactly what the first words out of my mouth are and actually rehearsing that last line, knowing that everything I'm about ready to say in this closing part, I've just delivered the 5 strategies or 4 ingredients or the 3 keys to how to do this or why you should do this. And now I'm wrapping this up, but I know that I'm coming to this final statement and I'm building to this crescendo. And then I'm like, boom, this thing. And so go out into the world, leave this conference today, and begin telling people no. Or I don't know, I'm just making it up at this point. But that is a strategy that really helped me to get the nervousness. I don't have to worry, what are my first words? What am I going to say? What am I going to... No, I've got it ahead. How am I going to close this thing with, it's like, how do I wrap this up? I already know. So mastering your bookends is strategy number 3. And then strategy number 4, rehearse it out loud. One of the things that has, for me, I know that the SCORE conference says I should get up on a stage and rehearse it like I'm on there and doing that. And have I done that to some degree, handful of times? Yes. But for me, what I like to do is I like to take a talk that I'm going to give at a conference, and I like to do it as a live stream and speak it out virtually in front of an audience. Sometimes I'll record podcast episodes. I will deliver the talk to a small group of people and say, hey, can I tell you this thing? I'd like to go through this outline of this talk. And I would get feedback. And doing that, rehearsing it out loud several times, number 1, lets me make sure that my timing is right so that I can fit within the allotted period of time. And the great news is that with this outline, this reproducible outline, knowing that it's not about me, and so it's not about how much time I get the spotlight, it's about the audience and what they walk away with. If I know my opening and my closing bookends, and if I have the actual ingredients of what they're going to get from this, I can, and if I've rehearsed it a number of times, if you give me 10 minutes, I can deliver this entire thing in 10 minutes. You give me 90 minutes, I can deliver it in 90 minutes. And it works every single time, and it got rid of all of my nervousness. All of this I developed as a result of going through some incredible public communication training through the SCORE conference, SCORRE, and being trained and mentored by my friend Ken Davis. And I will see if I can find any materials about the SCORE conference and put it in the show notes of this episode if it's still around. I know Ken is probably ready to retire these days if he hasn't retired, but I will certainly tell you to pick up the book Secrets of Dynamic Communication by Ken Davis. It is the heart of the message of what I learned at those 3 events. And I wish you great success in speaking without all of the nervousness, without all of the anxiety, without all of the lost hours of sleep, the seizing up of your body, without the digestive system completely shutting down or being incredibly distressed, giving you all sorts of undesirable evenings before your talks. I pray that you will be able to learn the skills to help you design a talk with no more than 15 minutes of preparation. If you are limited to 30 minutes to prepare for a talk, to fill in for somebody who is just got stuck at the airport, and somebody asks you, "Hey, could you speak on this topic?" and you get 30 minutes, in 15 minutes, you'd have your outline and you'd get up there with no slides and you could deliver this with confidence, with clarity, with focus, and know exactly what to deliver that audience. And not only that, if the audience was polled afterwards, they would be able to tell you exactly what your talk was about and what they're going to go do. And it would have been exactly what you wanted them to do. That is the secrets of dynamic communication. Get the book by Ken Davis. That's my recommendation. Hey, before I wrap this episode, I want to let you know, if you are an early stage entrepreneur or an aspiring entrepreneur, you have a desire to become a thought leader, you want to get your message out to the world, and you want to create products and services and build a business doing the work you feel most called to do in this world. Most people fail in their businesses. It's just a reality. And the reason why most people fail is because they miss the most foundational steps in building an online business. One of the things that I did after going through the SCORE conference so many different times, I decided to create a workshop that I hosted here in my home called Building an Online Business. We called it the Next Level Workshop here in the Next Level studio. I delivered, I think, 8 of these sessions, somewhere around there, filled it up with people who had paid $2,000 per person, with the exception of a handful of people who instead paid for the one option for each session for $7,500, where they got an extra full day to spend with me one-on-one to map out how to build all of this into their transition plan. But what I did is I taught these people, starting off with, hey, here is the 11-step formula for building an online business. And the reason that I believe most people have failed who have tried to launch a business is because they start with step number 8. And step number 8, by the way, is create content. And create content is not just your podcast, your blog, your social media posts, and your email newsletters, although those are all creating content. But guess what? Creating content is your website, it's your logo, it's your branding, it's choosing your domain name. All of that is creating content. And it's step 8. So if you actually are out there trying to find out how to monetize the thing you most want to do in this world, and you've got a logo, you've spent hours or maybe lots of money on designing a website, if you've been creating social media posts, if you've been creating YouTube videos, courses, podcast episode after episode, and you are not making consistent, profitable revenue month after month after month, chances are you started with step number 8. If you would have started with step number 1 and walked methodically through the first 7 steps before creating your URL, your website and logo and your podcast and all that other stuff, if you would have methodically gone through the first 7 steps, you would be the most likely to succeed and be one of the 4%, hear me out, 4% of businesses that are still surviving after 10 years. If you'd like to be one of those businesses that are not only surviving, but are thriving more than 10 years later. I started this nearly 20 years ago. Thriving today. I did not start this out thriving. I started it out barely surviving. And it's because I started with step number 8, my friends. And that's why I'm so passionate about this. Here's the situation. I told you that individuals had paid anywhere between $2,000 or they could have spent the $7,500. But on average, people paid $2,000 for this building an online business workshop. The very last time I did this, I only had 2 people come because I was actually marketing my Free the Dream annual conference at the time. I had forgotten to take the sales page down, but 2 people had signed up. And I'm like, hey, you guys, if you're okay with it being a small audience, I'm not promoting this to anyone else. If anybody else comes, it'll be great. But if not, it might be just the 2 of you. Do you care if that's the case? And I'm like, dude, if we get more of your attention, that's perfect with us. So we did it, just 2 people that last time I did this workshop. And I set a camera up in the back and I wore a wireless mic on my shirt and I recorded the video of every one of those sessions and I turned it into what is now called the Building an Online Business online course. I have since made that available for $1,000. Several people have paid the $1,000 to go through that and have absolutely experienced significant, massive transformation as a result. I want you to know that if you are an aspiring or early stage entrepreneur, or if you've been in business for the last 5-10 years and you're still just surviving, I want to give you this course for free. But here's the situation. You have to email me to get it. There's no landing page that I'm going to send you to. You have to email me. My email address is cliff@cliffravenscraft.com. Again, the email address, cliff@cliffravenscraft.com. In the subject line, put free building an online business course or something like free build business course. And then in the email, limit your email to me to 2 to 3 paragraphs. But tell me a little bit about your story about, number 1, how did you first discover me? Number 2, what is your dreams when it comes to your business? And number 3, where are you right now? And then ask me for free access to the Building an Online Business course. If you do that, I will give it to you for free, and I can't wait to hear from you. And more importantly, I can't wait to hear from you after you watch just the first module, the first official part of this online course, the 11-step formula for building an online business, because so much will shift for you. But after you go through that, most everyone then goes on to characteristics for success, the mindset shifts that you'll need, how to overcome your money issues. So much more is available in this course. It is worth thousands of dollars, but the only way you're going to get it for free is if you email me right now, cliff@cliffravenscraft.com. In the subject line, put Building an Online Business Course for free. And again, tell me a little bit of a story about you, but if you could limit it to 3 or 4 paragraphs, the shorter your email is, the faster I read it and respond and get you the access. I can't wait to hear from you. And until next time, I encourage you to take your confidence, your clarity, and your communication to a whole new next level.
Mindset and